Marilyn Monroe is one of the most iconic movie stars of all time, but behind the image was a life shaped by instability and abandoned childhood battles with depression, anxiety, addiction, and a string of painful relationships. She was often called difficult, emotional, or unpredictable. Today we may call those things something else because one of the most commonly overlooked struggles women face, even now, is how rarely they're diagnosed with ADHD. Not because their symptoms are different from men's, but because they often look different. Daydreaming instead of disruption, perfectionism instead of procrastination, people-pleasing instead of defiance. So when we look at Marilyn's life, her patterns, her sensitivity, her brilliance, it raises a question. What if Marilyn Monroe was living with ADHD all along and no one ever saw it for what it was? In this episode of May Be ADHD, we'll look at her story through the lens of the 5 core traits of ADHD: inattention, hyperfocus, impulsivity, emotional dysregulation, and rejection-sensitive dysphoria. Marilyn Monroe's ADHD didn't look like chaos. It looked like a little girl sitting quietly in class, daydreaming. Sweet, but somewhere else. She wasn't disruptive, she wasn't loud, but she did struggle silently. As a child, Norma Jean changed schools at least 11 times in 12 years, cycling through foster homes and guardians while her mother was institutionalized. That kind of constant instability was traumatic for any child, but for a child with ADHD, it can be even more devastating. And while the turmoil of her home life was chaotic and painful, her struggles in school weren't the kind teachers typically flagged. Again, she didn't act out, she didn't make noise, she just drifted. Teachers describe her as sweet but easily distracted. She often forgot assignments, and by the time she was old enough to legally drop out, she did. But her inattentiveness didn't end there. It followed her into adulthood, especially into her career. Marilyn Monroe became notorious for forgetting her lines on set. Co-stars frequently grew frustrated, crews grew resentful, and directors often grew impatient. In addition to this, she was also infamously late for filming quite frequently. And while some might dismiss this as diva-like behavior, when looked at in totality, they actually look like symptoms of ADHD, which doesn't only impair focus, it also disrupts memory, time awareness, and executive function. There's one moment that captures this perfectly. During the filming of Some Like It Hot, Marilyn was asked to deliver the simple line,
"Where's that bourbon?"
And she couldn't do it. She forgot it over and over and over again, take after take after take. She'd walk to the dresser, open it, and say things like, "Where's the bottle?" Or, "Where's the whiskey?" Or she would just stare, blinking, unsure of why she was even at the dresser. Eventually, Billy Wilder, the film's writer and director, had to tape the correct line inside of the drawer to help her, but the pressure only made it worse, and that's part of the problem people miss. Being asked to remember something under pressure when you have ADHD is like being asked to run a marathon with a sprained ankle, only everyone around you thinks you're lazy for limping. The studios made her a global phenomenon. Millions of dollars were on the line, everyone around her was working hard, so why couldn't she? The truth is, she was working twice as hard, just to keep up, and she was still falling behind. Nobody gave her grace, nobody made room for the possibility that the woman who could memorize or recite poems and passages from novels from memory might struggle to remember a 3-word line because the part of her brain responsible for attention simply didn't work the way theirs did. They saw a flake. They didn't see a little girl who learned to disassociate as a survival mechanism. They didn't see the bookworm who could focus with laser intensity on things she chose to care about. If inattention was her burden, hyperfocus was her superpower, and sometimes her curse. It's a myth that people with ADHD can't focus. They actually can, sometimes with superhuman intensity. The problem is not a lack of focus, it's actually a problem more of regulation. And when Marilyn found something that held her interest, the world around her disappeared. For her, that thing was books. As a teenager, long before she was Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean would hide away for hours to read, but she didn't just read. She devoured novels, poetry, philosophy, psychology. Her library later included Ulysses, Leaves of Grass, and Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. Reading gave her control. Unlike real people, book characters couldn't abandon her. She could open and close them on her terms. She could imagine them speaking how she wanted, reacting how she needed. And when the world was overwhelming, as it often was, books offered a refuge. She was obsessive about mirrors too, practicing facial expressions, experimenting with how to smile, how to pout, how to seduce, long before she had any reason to. This most likely wasn't vanity. It may have actually been training, and it paid off. After all, Marilyn wasn't born Marilyn. She carefully built her, consciously, like a novelist building a character. And once she never fully got to be Norma Jean again. Even journaling became a hyperfocus ritual. She poured herself into her notebooks, not as a performer, but as someone trying desperately to hold on to some kind of self. She wrote with vulnerability, even cruelty toward herself. When she'd make a mistake, she'd beat herself up in ink, saying things like, "I'm not a real actress. Sometimes I think I'm a joke. I think I hate myself. I can't do anything right. Why do I always ruin everything? And please help me. I feel so lonely and I'm scared." These journals became a place to exile Norma Jean when Marilyn began to take up most of her mind. Marilyn was the mask, and Norma Jean was the weight behind it. And these notebooks were where the two negotiated space. Acting too was a hyperfocus. It was how she regulated her emotions. The method, as it was known, wasn't a gimmick for her. It was salvation. She drew upon real experiences, real feelings, real pain, and when she lacked those, she used the emotions in the book she had read. Acting allowed her to release the internal buildup without being punished for it. On camera, crying was a gift. Off camera, it was a liability. She wasn't the only woman masking to survive, but she may have done it better, though more tragically than perhaps anyone else. Impulsivity in ADHD often gets mistaken for recklessness or drama, for women especially. It's often called being too much or being too emotional, too needy, too dramatic. For Marilyn Monroe, impulsivity became a key in how she made decisions. She married 3 times, and if you look closely, those marriages follow a familiar ADHD pattern, jumping into and intense relationships quickly, saying yes to things they later regret, and ending things abruptly by ghosting, fleeing, or shutting down. Her first marriage was to James Doherty when she was 16 years old. It was an impulsive solution to a problem. She was about to be returned to the orphanage. Marriage was a way out. It wasn't romantic, it was practical, and she gave it a few years. But once she discovered the powers that she had in front of the camera, once modeling entered the picture, the marriage unraveled. Her second marriage to Joe DiMaggio was another impulsively made decision. The sex symbol and the baseball legend. But beneath the headlines, it fell apart almost immediately. DiMaggio hated her image. When The 7-Year Itch was being filmed and her dress flew up on that subway grate, that infuriated Joe. Days later, she filed for divorce. Then came Arthur Miller, the smart one, the one who saw past the blonde bombshell, until he didn't. She needed to believe someone could love her mind, and for a while, Arthur played that part. But impulsivity wasn't just in her relationships. It was all over her professional life too. She'd agree to take roles she didn't want, then skip rehearsals, walk off set, take off mid-production without warning. Being on set meant being on the clock, surrounded by people with expectations. And when she felt like she wasn't meeting those expectations, when shame crept in, she'd vanish. During the filming of Some Like It Hot, Marilyn was extremely critical about her performance. As a result, she didn't show up on set for 35 straight days. The role Marilyn most regretted filming was The Misfits. In fact, Marilyn only signed on to do The Misfits in order to save her marriage to Arthur Miller. However, once filming got underway, she actually felt betrayed because the screenplay was remarkably close to the real Norma Jean, a person Marilyn tried desperately hard to keep hidden from the world. Miller claimed to be writing about the real Marilyn, but what he actually delivered was a veiled critique of her, a fragile, emotionally unstable woman clinging to broken men. She felt betrayed, as if he were airing her vulnerabilities in front of the world. Their marriage was crumbling, and during the filming she discovered his journal entry in which he wrote, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." That cut deep, and then she still had to act out a character that felt like his judgment of her. At that time, she was also physically and emotionally unwell. She was actually hospitalized during filming, battling depression, insomnia, and addiction. Again, she had difficulty remembering lines and was frequently late or absent. Filming stretched for 6 months for what was supposed to be a relatively short shoot. In the end, Marilyn felt exposed. This wasn't Marilyn the bombshell. It was Norma Jean trying to play Marilyn in a stripped-down story about disappointment and disillusionment. She didn't feel protected. She actually felt exploited. Ultimately, impulsivity also brings us to perhaps the most difficult truth. Her death may have been impulsive as well. Obviously, Marilyn Monroe is an extremely complex person. As such, this is just part 1. In this episode, we focused on the symptoms of ADHD that pushed Marilyn outward. Her distractibility, her hyperfocus, her impulsivity. But there's another side, a much more private one. In part 2, we will look inward. We'll talk about Marilyn's emotional dysregulation and rejection sensitivity. Part 2 is about the parts of Marilyn the world didn't see. And if you've ever felt like your biggest struggles are the one no one notices, this one's for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you've liked what you've seen, please feel free to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Feel free to leave a comment down below. And until next time, stay focused.